Section 14 of Unbeaten Tracks in Japan by Isabella L. Bird. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Availle in April 2012. Letter 11. Fujihara, June 24th. Ito's informants were right. Comfort was left behind at Niko. A little woman brought 2 depressed-looking mares at 6 this morning. My saddle and bridle were put on one, and Ito and the baggage on the other. My hosts and I exchanged cordial good wishes and obeisances, and, with the women dragging my sorry mare by a rope round her nose, we left the glorious shrines and solemn cryptomeria groves of Niko behind, passed down its long, clean street, and where the In Memoriam Avenue is densest and darkest, turned off to the left by a path like the bed of a brook, which afterwards, as a most atrocious trail, wound about among the rough boulders of the Daya, which it crosses often on temporary bridges of timbers covered with branches and soil. After crossing one of the low spurs of the Niko-san mountains, we wound among ravines whose steep sides are clothed with maple, oak, magnolia, elm, pine, and cryptomeria, linked together by festoons of the redundant Wisteria chinensis and brightened by azalea and syringa clusters. Every vista was blocked by some grand mountain, waterfalls thundered, bright streams glanced through the trees, and in the glorious sunshine of June the country looked most beautiful. We travelled less than a ri an hour, as it was a mere flounder either among rocks or in deep mud, the woman in her girt-up dress and straw sandals trudging bravely along, till she suddenly flung away the rope, cried out, and ran backwards, perfectly scared by a big grey snake with red spots, much embarrassed by a large frog which he would not let go, though, like most of his kind, he was alarmed by human approach, and made desperate efforts to swallow his victim and wriggle into the bushes. After crawling for 3 hours, we dismounted at the mountain farm of Kohiaku on the edge of a rice valley, and the woman counted her packages to see that they were all right, and without waiting for a gratuity turned homewards with her horses. I pitched my chair in the veranda of a house near a few poor dwellings inhabited by peasants with large families, the house being in the barnyard of a rich sake maker. I waited an hour, grew famished, got some weak tea and boiled barley, waited another hour, and yet another, for all the horses were eating leaves on the mountains. There was a little stir. Men carried sheaves of barley home on their backs and stacked them under the eaves. Children, with barely the rudiments of clothing, stood and watched me hour after hour, and adults were not ashamed to join the group, for they have never seen a foreign woman, or fork, or a spoon. Do you remember a sentence in Dr. MacGregor's last sermon? What strange sights some of you will see. Could there be a stranger one than a decent-looking, middle-aged man lying on his chest in the veranda, raised on his elbows, and intently reading a book, clothed only in a pair of spectacles? Besides that curious piece of still life, women frequently drew water from a well by the primitive contrivance of a beam suspended across an upright, with the bucket at one end and a stone at the other. When the horses arrived, the man said that they could not put on the bridle, but after much talk it was managed by 2 of them violently forcing open the jaws of the animal, while a third seized a propitious moment for slipping the bit into her mouth. At the next change a bridle was a thing unheard of, and when I suggested that the creature would open her mouth voluntarily if the bit were pressed close to her teeth, the standers-by mockingly said, "No horse ever opens his mouth except to eat or to bite," and were only convinced after I had put on the bridle myself. The new horses had a rocking gait like camels, and I was glad to dispense with them at Kisagoi, a small upland hamlet, a very poor place, with poverty-stricken houses, children very dirty and sorely afflicted by skin maladies, and women with complexions and features hardened by severe work and much wood smoke into positive ugliness, and with figures anything but statuesque. I write the truth as I see it, and if my accounts conflict with those of tourists who write of the Hokkaido and Nakasendo, of Lake Biwa and Hakone, it does not follow that either is inaccurate. But truly this is a new Japan to me, of which no books have given me any idea, and it is not fairyland. The men may be said to wear nothing. Few of the women wear anything but a short petticoat wound tightly round them, or blue cotton trousers very tight in the legs and baggy at the top, with a blue cotton garment open to the waist tucked into the band, and a blue cotton handkerchief knotted round the head. From the dress no notion of the sex of the wearer could be gained, nor from the faces, if it were not for the shaven eyebrows and black teeth. The short petticoat is truly barbarous looking, and when a woman has a nude baby on her back or in her arms and stands staring vacantly at the foreigner, I can hardly believe myself in civilized Japan. A good-sized child, strong enough to hold up his head, sees the world right cheerfully looking over his mother's shoulders, but it is a constant distress to me to see small children of 6 and 7 years old lugging on their backs gristly babies, whose shorn heads are frizzling in the sun and wobbling about as though they must drop off, their eyes, as nurses say, looking over their heads. A number of silkworms are kept in this region, and in the open barns groups of men in nature's costume and women unclothed to their waists were busy stripping mulberry branches. The houses were all poor, and the people dirty both in their clothing and persons. Some of the younger women might possibly have been comely, if soap and water had been plentifully applied to their faces, but soap is not used, and such washing as the garments get is only the rubbing them a little with sand in a running stream. I will give you an amusing instance of the way in which one may make absurd mistakes. I heard many stories of the viciousness and aggressiveness of pack horses, and was told that they were muzzled to prevent them from pasturing upon the haunches of their companions and making vicious snatches at men. Now, I find that the muzzle is only to prevent them from eating as they travel. Mares are used exclusively in this region, and they are the gentlest of their race. If you have the weight of baggage reckoned at 1 horse-load, though it should turn out that the weight is too great for a weakly animal, and the transport agent distributes it among 2 or even 3 horses, you only pay for 1. And though our cortege on leaving Kisagoe consisted of 4 small, shock-headed mares, who could hardly see through their bushy forelocks, with 3 active foals and 1 woman and 3 girls to lead them, I only paid for 2 horses at 7 sen a ri. My mago, with her toil-hardened, thoroughly good-natured face rendered hideous by black teeth, wore straw sandals, blue cotton trousers with a vest tucked into them, as poor as worn as they could be, and a blue cotton towel knotted round her head. As the sky looked threatening, she carried a straw rain cloak, a thatch of 2 connected capes, one fastening at the neck, the other at the waist, and a flat hat of flags 2.5 feet in diameter, hung at her back like a shield. Up and down, over rocks and through deep mud, she trudged with a steady stride, turning her kind, ugly face at intervals to see if the girls were following. I like the firm, hardy gait which this unbecoming costume permits, better than the painful shuffle imposed upon the more civilized women by their tight skirts and high clogs. From Kohyaku the road passed through an irregular grassy valley between densely wooded hills, the valley itself timbered with park-like clumps of pine and Spanish chestnuts, but on leaving Kisagoe the scenery changed. A steep rocky tract brought us to the Kinugava, a clear rushing river, which has cut its way deeply through coloured rock, and is crossed at a considerable height by a bridge with an alarmingly steep curve, from which there is a fine view of high mountains, and among them Futarayama, to which some of the most ancient Shinto legends are attached. We rode for some time within hearing of the Kinugava, catching magnificent glimpses of it frequently, turbulent and locked in by walls of porphyry, or widening and calming, and spreading its aquamarine waters over great slabs of pink and green rock, lighted fitfully by the sun, or spanned by rainbows, or pausing to rest in deep shady pools, but always beautiful. The mountains through which it forces its way on the other side are precipitous and wooded to their summits with coniferae, while the less abrupt side, along which the tract is carried, curves into green knolls in its lower slopes, sprinkled with grand Spanish chestnuts scarcely yet in blossom, with maples which have not yet lost the scarlet which they wear in spring as well as in autumn, and with many flowering trees and shrubs which are new to me, and with an undergrowth of red azaleas, syringa, blue hydrangea, the very blue of heaven, yellow raspberries, ferns, clematis, white and yellow lilies, blue irises, and 50 other trees and shrubs entangled and festooned by the wisteria, whose beautiful foliage is as common as that of the bramble with us. The redundancy of the vegetation was truly tropical, and the brilliancy and variety of its living greens, dripping with recent rain, were enhanced by the slant rays of the afternoon sun. The few hamlets we passed are of farmhouses only, the deep-eaved roofs covering in one sweep dwelling house, barn, and stable. In every barn unclothed people were pursuing various industries. We met strings of pack mares, tied head and tail, loaded with rice and sake, and men and women carrying large creels full of mulberry leaves. The ravine grew more and more beautiful, and an ascent through a dark wood of arrowy cryptomeria brought us to this village exquisitely situated, where a number of miniature ravines, industriously terraced for rice, come down upon the great chasm of the Kinugava. 11 hours of travelling have brought me 18 miles. Ikari, June 25th. Fujihara has 46 farmhouses and a yadoya, all dark, damp, dirty, and draughty, a combination of dwelling house, barn, and stable. The yadoya consisted of a daidokoro, or open kitchen, and stable below, and a small loft above, capable of division, and I found on returning from a walk 6 Japanese in extreme déshabillé occupying the part through which I had to pass. On this being remedied, I sat down to write, but was soon driven upon the balcony, under the eaves, by myriads of fleas, which hopped out of the mats as sandhoppers do out of the sea sand, and even in the balcony hopped over my letter. There were 2 outer walls of hairy mud with living creatures crawling in the cracks, cobwebs hung from the uncovered rafters. The mats were brown with age and dirt, the rice was musty and only partially cleaned, the eggs had seen better days, and the tea was musty. I saw everything out of doors with Ito, the patient industry, the exquisitely situated village, the evening avocations, the quiet dullness, and then contemplated it all from my balcony and read the sentence, from a paper in the Transactions of the Asiatic Society, which had led me to devise this journey: "There is a most exquisitely picturesque but difficult route up the course of the Kinugava, which seems almost as unknown to Japanese as to foreigners." There was a pure lemon-colored sky above, and slush a foot deep below. A road, at this time a quagmire, intersected by a rapid stream, crossed in many places by planks, runs through the village. This stream is at once lavatory and drinking fountain. People come back from their work, sit on the planks, take off their muddy clothes and wring them out, and bathe their feet in the current. On either side are the dwellings, in front of which are much decayed manure heaps, and the women were engaged in breaking them up and treading them into a pulp with their bare feet. All wear the vest and trousers at their work, but only the short petticoats in their houses, and I saw several respectable mothers of families cross the road and pay visits in this garment only, without any sense of impropriety. The younger children wear nothing but a string and an amulet. The persons, clothing, and houses are alive with vermin, and if the word squalor can be applied to independent and industrious people, they were squalid. Beetles, spiders, and woodlice held a carnival in my room after dark, and the presence of horses in the same house brought a number of horseflies. I sprinkled my stretcher with insect powder, but my blanket had been on the floor for 1 minute, and fleas rendered sleep impossible. The night was very long. The andon went out, leaving a strong smell of rancid oil. The primitive Japanese dog, a cream-colored, wolfish-looking animal, the size of a collie, very noisy and aggressive, but as cowardly as bullies usually are, was in great force in Fujihara, and the barking, growling, and quarreling of these useless curs continued at intervals until daylight, and when they were not quarreling, they were howling. Torrents of rain fell, obliging me to move my bed from place to place to get out of the drip. At 5 Ito came and entreated me to leave, whimpering, "I've had no sleep, there are thousands and thousands of fleas." He has travelled by another route to the Tsugaru Strait through the interior, and says that he would not have believed that there was such a place in Japan, and that people in Yokohama will not believe it when he tells them of it and of the costume of the women. He is "ashamed for a foreigner to see such a place," he says. His cleverness in travelling and his singular intelligence surprise me daily. He is very anxious to speak good English, as distinguished from common English, and to get new words with their correct pronunciation and spelling. Each day he puts down in his notebook all the words that I use that he does not quite understand, and in the evening brings them to me and puts down their meaning and spelling with their Japanese equivalents. He speaks English already far better than many professional interpreters, but would be more pleasing if he had not picked up some American vulgarisms and free and easy ways. It is so important to me to have a good interpreter, or I should not have engaged so young and inexperienced a servant, but he is so clever that he is now able to be cook, laundryman, and general attendant, as well as courier and interpreter, and I think it is far easier for me than if he were an older man. I am trying to manage him, because I saw that he meant to manage me, especially in the matter of squeezes. He is intensely Japanese, his patriotism has all the weakness and strength of personal vanity, and he thinks everything inferior that is foreign. Our manners, eyes, and modes of eating appear simply odious to him. He delights in retailing stories of the bad manners of Englishmen, describes them as roaring out Ohio to everyone on the road, frightening the tea-house nymphs, kicking or slapping their coolies, stamping over white mats in muddy boots, acting generally like ill-bred satires, exciting an ill-concealed hatred in simple country districts, and bringing themselves and their country into contempt and ridicule. He is very anxious about my good behavior, and as I am equally anxious to be courteous everywhere in Japanese fashion, and not to violate the general rules of Japanese etiquette, I take his suggestions as to what I ought to do and avoid in very good part, and my bows are growing more profound every day. The people are so kind and courteous that it is truly brutal in foreigners not to be kind and courteous to them. You will observe that I am entirely dependent on Ito, not only for travelling arrangements, but for making inquiries, gaining information, and even for companionship, such as it is, and our being mutually embarked on a hard and adventurous journey will, I hope, make us mutually kind and considerate. Nominally, he is a Shintoist, which means nothing. At Niko I read to him the earlier chapters of St. Luke, and when I came to the story of the prodigal son I was interrupted by a somewhat scornful laugh and the remark, "Why, all this is our Buddha over again." Today's journey, though very rough, has been rather pleasant. The rain moderated at noon, and I left Fujihara on foot, wearing my American mountain dress and Wellington boots, the only costume in which ladies can enjoy pedestrian or pack-horse traveling in this country, with a light straw mat, the waterproof of the region, hanging over my shoulders, and so we plodded on with 2 baggage horses through the ankle-deep mud, till the rain cleared off, the mountains looked through the mist, the augmented Kinugava thundered below, and enjoyment became possible, even in my half-fed condition. Eventually I mounted a pack saddle, and we crossed the spur of Takata at a height of 2,100 feet, on a well-devised series of zigzags, 8 of which in one place could be seen one below another. The forest there is not so dense as usual, and the lower mountain slopes are sprinkled with noble Spanish chestnuts. The descent was steep and slippery, the horse had tender feet, and after stumbling badly eventually came down, and I went over his head, to the great distress of the kindly female mago. The straw shoes tied with wisps around the pasterns are a great nuisance. The shoestrings always coming untied, and the shoes only wear about 2 ri on soft ground, and less than 1 on hard. They keep the feet so soft and spongy that the horses can't walk without them at all, and as soon as they get thin your horse begins to stumble, the mago gets uneasy, and presently you stop. 4 shoes which are hanging from the saddle are soaked in water and are tied on with much coaxing, raising the animal fully an inch above the ground. Anything more temporary and clumsy could not be devised. The bridle paths are strewn with them, and the children collect them in heaps to decay for manure. They cost 3 or 4 sen the set, and in every village men spend their leisure time in making them. At the next stage, called Takahara, we got 1 horse for the baggage, crossed the river and the ravine, and by a steep climb reached a solitary yadoya with the usual open front and irori, round which a number of people, old and young, were sitting. When I arrived, a whole bevy of nice-looking girls took to flight, but were soon recalled by a word from Ito to their elders. Lady Parks, on a side saddle and in a riding habit, has been taken for a man till the people saw her hair, and a young friend of mine, who is very pretty and has a beautiful complexion, when travelling lately with her husband, was supposed to be a man who had shaven off his beard. I wear a hat, which is a thing only worn by women in the fields as a protection from sun and rain. My eyebrows are unshaven and my teeth are unblackened, so these girls supposed me to be a foreign man. Ito in explanation said, "They haven't seen any, but everybody brings them tales how rude foreigners are to girls, and they are awfully scared." There was nothing eatable but rice and eggs, and I ate them under the concentrated stare of 18 pairs of dark eyes. The hot springs, to which many people afflicted with sores resort, are by the river, at the bottom of a rude flight of steps, in an open shed, but I could not ascertain their temperature, as a number of men and women were sitting in the water. They bathe 4 times a day, and remain for an hour at a time. We left for the 5 miles walk to Ikari in a torrent of rain by a newly made path completely shut in with the cascading Kinugava, and carried along sometimes low, sometimes high, on props projecting over it from the face of the rock. I do not expect to see anything lovelier in Japan. The river, always crystal blue or crystal green, largely increased in volume by the rains, forces itself through gates of brightly colored rock, by which its progress is repeatedly arrested, and rarely lingers for rest in all its sparkling, rushing course. It is walled in by high mountains, gloriously wooded and cleft by dark ravines, down which torrents were tumbling in great drifts of foam, crashing and booming, boom and crash multiplied by many an echo, and every ravine afforded glimpses far back of more mountains, clefts, and waterfalls, and such overabundant vegetation that I welcomed the sight of a grey cliff or bare face of rock. Along the path here were fascinating details, composed of the manifold greenery which revels in damp heat, ferns, mosses, conifervae, fungi, trailers, shading tiny rills which dropped down into grottos feathery with the exquisite Trichomanes radicans, or drooped over the rustic path and hung into the river, and overhead the finely incised and almost feathery foliage of several varieties of maple admitted the light only as a green mist. The spring tints have not yet darkened into the monotone of summer. Rose azaleas still light the hillsides, and masses of cryptomeria give depth and shadow. Still, beautiful as it all is, one sighs for something which shall satisfy one's craving for startling individuality and grace of form, as in the cocoa palm and banana of the tropics. The featheriness of the maple and the arrowy straightness and pyramidal form of the cryptomeria please me better than all else, but why criticize? 10 minutes of sunshine would transform the whole into fairyland. There were no houses and no people. Leaving this beautiful river, we crossed the spur of a hill, where all the trees were matted together by a very fragrant white honeysuckle, and came down upon an open valley where a quiet stream joins the long-tongued Kinugava, and another mile brought us to this beautifully situated hamlet of 25 houses, surrounded by mountains, and close to a mountain stream called the Okawa. The names of Japanese rivers give one very little geographical information from their want of continuity. A river changes its name several times in a course of 30 or 40 miles, according to the districts through which it passes. This is my old friend, the Kinugava, up which I have been travelling for 2 days. Want of space is a great aid to the picturesque. Ikari is crowded together on a hill slope, and its short, primitive-looking street, with its warm browns and greys, is quite attractive in the clear shining after rain. My halting place is at the express office at the top of the hill, a place like a big barn, with horses at one end and a living room at the other, and in the center much produce awaiting transport, and a group of people stripping mulberry branches. The nearest daimyo used to halt here on his way to Tokyo, so there are 2 rooms for travelers, called daimyo's rooms, 15 feet high, handsomely sealed in dark wood, the shoji of such fine work as to merit the name of fretwork, the fusuma artistically decorated, the mats clean and fine, and in the alcove a sword rack of old gold lacquer. Mine is the inner room, and Ito and 4 travelers occupy the outer one. Though very dark, it is luxury after last night. The rest of the house is given up to the rearing of silkworms. The housemasters here and at Fujihara are not used to passports, and Ito, who is posing as a town-bred youth, has explained and copied mine, all the village men assembling to hear it read aloud. He does not know the word used for scientific investigation, but, in the idea of increasing his own importance by exaggerating mine, I hear him telling the people that I am a gakusha, that is, learned. There is no police station here, but every month policemen pay domiciliary visits to these outlying yadoyas and examine the register of visitors. This is a much neater place than the last. but the people look stupid and apathetic, and I wonder what they think of the men who have abolished the daimyo and the feudal regime, have raised the eta to citizenship, and are hurrying the empire forward on the tracks of Western civilization. Since shingle has given place to thatch, there is much to admire in the villages, with their steep roofs, deep eaves and balconies, the warm russet of roofs and walls, the quaint confusion of the farmhouses, the hedges of camellia and pomegranate, the bamboo clumps and persimmon orchards, and, in spite of dirt and bad smells, the generally satisfied look of the peasant proprietors. No food can be got here except rice and eggs, and I am haunted by memories of the fowls and fish of Niko, to say nothing of the flesh pots of the legation, and a sorrow's crown of sorrow is remembering happier things. The mercury falls to 70 degrees at night, and I generally awake from cold at 3 a.m., for my blankets are only summer ones, and I dare not supplement them with a quilt, either for sleeping on or under, because of the fleas which it contains. I usually retire about 7:30, for there is almost no twilight, and very little inducement for sitting up by the dimness of candle or andon, and I have found these days of riding on slow, rolling, stumbling horses very severe, and if I were anything of a walker, should certainly prefer pedestrianism. ILB. End of section 14. Of Unbeaten Tracks in Japan by Isabella L. Bird. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Availle in April 2012. Letter 12, Part 1. Kurumatoge, June 30th. After the hard traveling of 6 days, the rest of Sunday in a quiet place at a high elevation is truly delightful. Mountains and passes, valleys and rice swamps, forests and rice swamps, villages and rice swamps, poverty, industry, dirt, ruinous temples, prostrate Buddhas, strings of straw-shod pack-horses, long, grey, featureless streets, and quiet, staring crowds are all jumbled up fantastically in my memory. Fine weather accompanied me through beautiful scenery from Ikari to Yokogawa, where I ate my lunch in the street to avoid the innumerable fleas of the tea-house, with a circle round me of nearly all the inhabitants. At first the children, both old and young, were so frightened that they ran away, but by degrees they timidly came back, clinging to the skirts of their parents, skirts in this case being a metaphorical expression, running away again as often as I looked at them. The crowd was filthy and squalid beyond description. Why should the quiver of poverty be so very full? One asks as one looks at the swarms of gentle, naked, old-fashioned children, born to a heritage of hard toil, to be, like their parents, devoured by vermin and pressed hard for taxes. A horse kicked off my saddle before it was girthed, the crowd scattered right and left, and work, which had been suspended for 2 hours to stare at the foreigner, began again. A long ascent took us up to the top of a pass 2,500 feet in height, a projecting spur not 30 feet wide, with a grand view of mountains and ravines, and a maze of involved streams, which unite in a vigorous torrent, whose course we followed for some hours, till it expanded into a quiet river, lounging lazily through a rice swamp of considerable extent. The map is blank in this region, but I judged, as I afterwards found rightly, that at that pass we had crossed the watershed, and that the streams thenceforward no longer fall into the Pacific, but into the Sea of Japan. At Itosawa the horses produced stumbled so intolerably that I walked the last stage, and reached Kayashima, a miserable village of 57 houses, so exhausted that I could not go farther, and was obliged to put up with worse accommodation even than at Fujihara, with less strength for its hardships. The yadoya was simply awful. The daidokoro had a large wood fire burning in a trench, filling the whole place with stinging smoke, from which my room, which was merely screened off by some dilapidated shoji, was not exempt. The rafters were black and shiny with soot and moisture. The housemaster, who knelt persistently on the floor of my room till he was dislodged by Ito, apologized for the dirt of his house, as well he might. Stifling, dark, and smoky as my room was, I had to close the paper windows, owing to the crowd which assembled in the street. There was neither rice nor soy, and Ito, who values his own comfort, began to speak to the housemaster and servants loudly and roughly, and to throw my things about, a style of acting which I promptly terminated, for nothing could be more hurtful to a foreigner or more unkind to the people than for a servant to be rude and bullying, and the man was most polite and never approached me but on bended knees. When I gave him my passport, as the custom is, he touched his forehead with it and then touched the earth with his forehead. I found nothing that I could eat except black beans and boiled cucumbers. The room was dark, dirty, vile, noisy, and poisoned by sewage odors, as rooms unfortunately are very apt to be. At the end of the rice planting there is a holiday for 2 days, when many offerings are made to Inari, the god of rice farmers, and the holiday makers kept up their revel all night, and drums, stationary and peripatetic, were constantly beaten in such a way as to prevent sleep. A little boy, the housemaster's son, was suffering from a very bad cough, and a few drops of chlorodyne which I gave him allayed it so completely that the cure was noised abroad in the earliest hours of the next morning, and by 5 o'clock nearly the whole population was assembled outside my room, with much whispering and shuffling of shoeless feet, and applications of eyes to the many holes in the paper windows. When I drew aside the shoji I was disconcerted by the painful sight which presented itself, for the people were pressing one upon another, fathers and mothers holding naked children covered with skin disease, or with scald head, or ringworm, daughters leading mothers nearly blind, men exhibiting painful sores, children blinking with eyes infested by flies and nearly closed with ophthalmia, and all, sick and well, in truly vile raiment, lamentably dirty and swarming with vermin, the sick asking for medicine, and the well either bringing the sick or gratifying an apathetic curiosity. Sadly I told them that I did not understand their manifold diseases and torments, and that if I did, I had no stock of medicines, and that in my own country the constant washing of clothes, the constant application of water to the skin, accompanied by friction with clean cloths, would be much relied upon by doctors for the cure and prevention of similar cutaneous diseases. To pacify them I made some ointment of animal fat and flowers of sulphur, extracted with difficulty from some man's hoard, and told them how to apply it to some of the worst cases. The horse, being unused to a girth, became fidgety as it was being saddled, creating a stampede among the crowd, and the mago would not touch it again. They are as much afraid of their gentle mares as if they were panthers. All the children followed me for a considerable distance, and a good many of the adults made an excuse for going in the same direction. These people wear no linen, and their clothes, which are seldom washed, are constantly worn, night and day, as long as they will hold together. They seal up their houses as hermetically as they can at night, and herd together in numbers in one sleeping room, with its atmosphere vitiated, to begin with, by charcoal and tobacco fumes, huddled up in their dirty garments in wadded quilts, which are kept during the day in close cupboards and are seldom washed from one year's end to another. The tatami, between a tolerably fair exterior, swarm with insect life, and are receptacles of dust, organic matters, etc. The hair, which is loaded with oil and bandoline, is dressed once a week, or less often in these districts, and it is unnecessary to enter into any details regarding the distressing results, and much besides may be left to the imagination. The persons of the people, especially of the children, are infested with vermin, and one fruitful source of skin sores is the irritation arising from this cause. The floors of houses, being concealed by mats, are laid down carelessly with gaps between the boards, and as the damp earth is only 18 inches or 2 feet below, emanations of all kinds enter the mats and pass into the rooms. The houses in this region, and I believe everywhere, are hermetically sealed at night, both in summer and winter, the amado, which are made without ventilators, literally boxing them in, so that, unless they are falling to pieces, which is rarely the case, none of the air vitiated by the breathing of many persons, by the emanations from their bodies and clothing, by the miasmata produced by defective domestic arrangements, and by the fumes from charcoal hibachi, can ever be renewed. Exercise is seldom taken from choice, and unless the women work in the fields, they hang over charcoal fumes the whole day for 5 months of the year, engaged in interminable processes of cooking, or in the attempt to get warm. Much of the food of the peasantry is raw or half-raw salt fish, and vegetables rendered indigestible by being coarsely pickled, all bolted with the most marvellous rapidity, as if the one object of life were to rush through a meal in the shortest possible time. The married women look as if they had never known youth, and their skin is apt to be like tanned leather. At Kayashima I asked the housemaster's wife, who looked about 50, how old she was, a polite question in Japan, and she replied 22. One of many similar surprises. Her boy was 5 years old and was still unweaned. This digression disposes of one aspect of the population. End of section 15. Of Unbeaten Tracks in Japan by Isabella L. Bird. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Availle in April 2012. Letter 12, Part 2. We changed horses at Tajima, formerly a daimyo's residence, and, for a Japanese town, rather picturesque. It makes and exports clogs, coarse pottery, coarse lacquer, and coarse baskets. After travelling through rice fields varying from 30 yards square to a quarter of an acre, with the tops of the dikes utilized by planting dwarf beans along them, we came to a large river, the Arakai, along whose affluents we had been tramping for 2 days, and, after passing through several filthy villages, thronged with filthy and industrious inhabitants, crossed it in a scow. High forks, planted securely in the bank on either side, sustained a rope formed of several strands of the wisteria knotted together. One man hauled on this hand over hand, another poled at the stern, and the rapid current did the rest. In this fashion we have crossed many rivers subsequently. Tariffs of charges are posted at all ferries, as well as at all bridges where charges are made, and a man sits in an office to receive the money. The country was really very beautiful. The views were wider and finer than on the previous days, taking in great sweeps of peaked mountains, wooded to their summits, and from the top of the pass of Sanno the clustered peaks were glorified into unearthly beauty in a golden mist of evening sunshine. I slept at a house combining silk farm, post office, express office, and daimyo's rooms, at the hamlet of Uchi, prettily situated in a valley with mountainous surroundings, and, leaving early on the following morning, had a very grand ride, passing in a crateriform cavity the pretty little lake of Oyake, and then ascending the magnificent pass of Ichikawa. We turned off what, by ironical courtesy, is called the main road, upon a villainous track, consisting of a series of lateral corrugations, about a foot broad, with depressions between them more than a foot deep, formed by the invariable treading of the pack-horses in each other's footsteps. Each hole was a quagmire of tenacious mud, the ascent of 2,400 feet was very steep, and the mago adjured the animals the whole time with "Hai, hai, hai," which is supposed to suggest to them that extreme caution is requisite. Their shoes were always coming untied, and they wore out 2 sets in 4 miles. The top of the pass, like that of a great many others, is a narrow ridge, on the farther side of which the track dips abruptly into a tremendous ravine, along whose side we descended for a mile or so in company with a river whose reverberating thunder drowned all attempts at speech. A glorious view it was, looking down between the wooded precipices to a rolling wooded plain, lying in depths of indigo shadow, bounded by ranges of wooded mountains, and overtopped by heights heavily splotched with snow. The vegetation was significant of a milder climate. The magnolia and bamboo reappeared, and tropical ferns mingled with the beautiful blue hydrangea, the yellow Japan lily, and the great blue campanula. There was an ocean of trees entangled with a beautiful trailer, Actinidia polygama, with a profusion of white leaves, which, at a distance, look like great clusters of white blossoms. But the rank undergrowth of the forests of this region is not attractive. Many of its component parts deserve the name of weeds, being gawky, ragged umbels, coarse docks, rank nettles, and many other things which I don't know, and never wish to see again. Near the end of this descent, my mare took the bit between her teeth and carried me at an ungainly gallop into the beautifully situated, precipitous village of Ichikawa, which is absolutely saturated with moisture by the spray of a fine waterfall which tumbles through the middle of it, and its trees and roadside are green with the Protococcus viridis. The transport agent there was a woman. Women keep yadoyas and shops, and cultivate farms as freely as men. Boards giving the number of inhabitants, male and female, and the number of horses and bullocks, are put up in each village, and I noticed in Ichikawa, as everywhere hitherto, that men preponderate. ILB. End of section 16. Of Unbeaten Tracks in Japan by Isabella L. Bird. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Availle in April 2012. Letter 13. Kurumatoge, June 30th. A short ride took us from Ichikawa to a plain about 11 miles broad by 18 long. The large town of Wakamatsu stands near its southern end, and it is sprinkled with towns and villages. The great lake of Iniwashiro is not far off. The plain is rich and fertile. In the distance the steep roofs of its villages with their groves look very picturesque. As usual, not a fence or gate is to be seen, or any other hedge than the tall one used as a screen for the dwellings of the richer farmers. Bad roads and bad horses detracted from my enjoyment. 1 hour of a good horse would have carried me across the plain. As it was, 7 weary hours were expended upon it. The day degenerated and closed in still, hot rain, the air was stifling and electric, the saddle slipped constantly from being too big, the shoes were more than usually troublesome, the horseflies tormented, and the men and horses crawled. The rice fields were undergoing a second process of puddling, and many of the men engaged in it wore only a hat and a fan attached to the girdle. An avenue of cryptomeria and two handsome and somewhat gilded Buddhist temples denoted the approach to a place of some importance, and such Takata is, as being a large town with a considerable trade in silk, rope, and minjin, and the residence of one of the higher officials of the ken or prefecture. The street is a mile long, and every house is a shop. The general aspect is mean and forlorn. In these little travelled districts, as soon as one reaches the margin of a town, the first man one meets turns and flies down the street, calling out the Japanese equivalent of "Here's a foreigner!" And soon blind and seeing, old and young, clothed and naked, gather together. At the yadoya the crowd assembled in such force that the housemaster removed me to some pretty rooms in a garden, but then the adults climbed on the house roofs which overlooked it, and the children on a palisade at the end, which broke down under their weight and admitted the whole inundation, so that I had to close the shoji, with the fatiguing consciousness during the whole time of nominal rest of a multitude surging outside. Then 5 policemen in black alpaca frock coats and white trousers invaded my precarious privacy, desiring to see my passport, a demand never made before, except where I halted for the night. In their European clothes they cannot bow with Japanese punctiliousness, but they were very polite, and expressed great annoyance at the crowd, and dispersed it, but they had hardly disappeared when it gathered again. When I went out, I found fully 1,000 people helping me to realize how the crowded cities of Judea send forth people clothed much as these are when the miracle workers from Galilee arrived, but not what the fatigue of the crowding and buzzing must have been to one who had been preaching and working during the long day. These Japanese crowds, however, are quiet and gentle, and never press rudely upon one. I could not find it in my heart to complain of them, except to you. 4 of the policemen returned and escorted me to the outskirts of the town. The noise made by 1,000 people shuffling along in clogs is like the clatter of a hailstorm. After this there was a dismal tramp of 5 hours through rice fields. The moist climate and the fatigue of this manner of travelling are deteriorating my health, and the pain in my spine, which has been daily increasing, was so severe that I could neither ride nor walk for more than 20 minutes at a time, and the pace was so slow that it was 6 when we reached Bangé, a commercial town of 5,000 people, literally in the rice swamp, mean, filthy, damp, and decaying, and full of an overpowering stench from black, slimy ditches. The mercury was 84 degrees, and hot rain fell fast through the motionless air. We dismounted in a shed full of bales of dried fish, which gave off an overpowering odour, and wet and dirty people crowded in to stare at the foreigner till the air seemed unbreathable. But there were signs of progress. A 3 days' congress of schoolmasters was being held, candidates for vacant situations were being examined, there were lengthy educational discussions going on, especially on the subject of the value of the Chinese classes as a part of education, and every inn was crowded. Bangé was malarious. There was so much malarious fever that the government had sent additional medical assistance. The hills were only a ri off, and it seemed essential to go on. But not a horse could be got till 10 p.m., the road was worse than the one I had travelled, the pain became more acute, and I more exhausted, and I was obliged to remain. Then followed a weary hour, in which the express agent's 5 emissaries were searching for a room, and considerably after dark I found myself in a rambling, old, overcrowded yadoya, where my room was mainly built on piles above stagnant water, and the mosquitoes were in such swarms as to make the air dense, and after a feverish and miserable night I was glad to get up early and depart. Fully 2,000 people had assembled. After I was mounted, I was on the point of removing my dolond from the case, which hung on the saddle horn, when a regular stampede occurred, old and young running as fast as they possibly could, children being knocked down in the haste of their elders. Ito said that they thought I was taking out a pistol to frighten them, and I made him explain what the object really was, for they are a gentle, harmless people, whom one would not annoy without sincere regret. In many European countries, and certainly in some parts of our own, a solitary lady traveller in a foreign dress would be exposed to rudeness, insult, and extortion, if not to actual danger, but I have not met with a single instance of incivility or real overcharge, and there is no rudeness even about the crowding. The mago are anxious that I should not get wet or be frightened, and very scrupulous in seeing that all straps and loose things are safe at the end of the journey, and, instead of hanging about asking for gratuities or stopping to drink and gossip, they quickly unload the horses, get a paper from the transport agent, and go home. Only yesterday a strap was missing, and though it was after dark, the man went back a ri for it, and refused to take some sen which I wished to give him, saying he was responsible for delivering everything right at the journey's end. They are so kind and courteous to each other, which is very pleasing. Ito is not pleasing or polite in his manner to me, but when he speaks to his own people he cannot free himself from the shackles of etiquette, and bows as profoundly and uses as many polite phrases as anybody else. In an hour the malarious plain was crossed, and we have been among piles of mountains ever since. The infamous road was so slippery that my horse fell several times, and the baggage horse, with Ito upon him, rolled head over heels, sending his miscellaneous pack in all directions. Good roads are really the most pressing need of Japan. It would be far better if the government were to enrich the country by such a remunerative outlay as making passable roads for the transport of goods through the interior, than to impoverish it by buying ironclads in England and indulging in expensive Western vanities. That so horrible a road should have so good a bridge as that by which we crossed the broad river Agano is surprising. It consists of 12 large scows, each one secured to a strong cable of plaited wisteria, which crosses the river at a great height, so as to allow of the scows and the plank bridge which they carry, rising and falling with the 12 feet variation of the water. Ito's disaster kept him back for an hour, and I sat meanwhile on a rice sack in the hamlet of Katakado, a collection of steep-roofed houses huddled together in a height above the Agano. It was one mob of pack-horses, over 200 of them, biting, squealing, and kicking. Before I could dismount, one vicious creature struck at me violently, but only hit the great wooden stirrup. I could hardly find any place out of the range of hoofs or teeth. My baggage horse showed great fury after he was unloaded. He attacked people right and left with his teeth, struck out savagely with his forefeet, lashed out with his hind ones, and tried to pin his master up against a wall. Leaving this fractious scene, we struck again through the mountains. Their ranges were interminable, and every view from every fresh ridge grander than the last, for we were now near the lofty range of the Aitsu mountains, and the double-peaked Bandai-san, the abrupt precipices of Itoya-san, and the grand mass of Miyojin-take in the southwest, with their vast snowfields and snow-filled ravines, were all visible at once. These summits of naked rock or dazzling snow, rising above the smothering greenery of the lower ranges into a heaven of delicious blue, gave exactly that individuality and emphasis which, to my thinking, Japanese scenery usually lacks. Riding on first, I arrived alone at the little town of Nozawa to encounter the curiosity of a crowd, and, after a rest, we had a very pleasant walk of 3 miles along the side of a ridge above a rapid river with fine grey cliffs on its farther side, with a grand view of the Aitsu giants, violet-coloured in a golden sunset. At dusk we came upon the picturesque village of Nojiri on the margin of a rice valley, but I shrank from spending Sunday in a hole, and, having spied a solitary house on the very brow of a hill 1,500 feet higher, I dragged out the information that it was a tea-house, and came up to it. It took 3/4 of an hour to climb the series of precipitous zigzags by which this remarkable pass is surmounted. Darkness came on, accompanied by thunder and lightning, and just as we arrived, a tremendous zigzag of blue flame lit up the house and its interior, showing a large group sitting round a wood fire, and then all was thick darkness again. It had a most startling effect. This house is magnificently situated, almost hanging over the edge of the knife-like ridge on the pass of Kuruma, on which it is situated. It is the only yadoya I have been at from which there has been any view. The villages are nearly always in the valleys, and the best rooms are at the back and have their prospects limited by the paling of the conventional garden. If it were not for the fleas, which are here in legions, I should stay longer, for the view of the Aitsu snow is delicious, and, as there are only 2 other houses, one can ramble without being mobbed. In one, a child 2½ years old swallowed a fishbone last night, and has been suffering and crying all day, and the grief of the mother so won Ito's sympathy that he took me to see her. She had walked up and down with it for 18 hours, but never thought of looking into its throat, and was very unwilling that I should do so. The bone was visible and easily removed with a crochet needle. An hour later, the mother sent a tray with a quantity of cakes and coarse confectionery upon it as a present, with the piece of dry seaweed which always accompanies a gift. Before night, 7 people with sore legs applied for advice. The sores were all superficial and all alike, and their owners said that they had been produced by the incessant rubbing of the bites of ants. On this summer day the country looks as prosperous as it is beautiful, and one would not think that acute poverty could exist in the steep-roofed village of Nojiri, which nestles at the foot of the hill, but 2 hempen ropes dangling from a cryptomeria just below tell the sad tale of an elderly man who hanged himself 2 days ago because he was too poor to provide for a large family, and the housemistress and Ito tell me that when a man who has a young family gets too old or feeble for work, he often destroys himself. My hostess is a widow with a family, a good-natured, bustling woman with a great love of talk. All day her house is open all round, having literally no walls. The roof and solitary upper room are supported on posts, and my ladder almost touches the kitchen fire. During the daytime the large matted area under the roof has no divisions, and groups of travellers and magos lie about, for everyone who has toiled up either side of Kuruma-toge takes a cup of tea with eating, and the housemistress is busy the whole day. A big well is near the fire. Of course there is no furniture, but a shelf runs under the roof, on which there is a Buddhist god-house with 2 black idols in it, one of them being that much worshipped divinity Daikoku, the god of wealth. Besides a rack for kitchen utensils, there is only a stand on which are 6 large brown dishes with food for sale, salt shellfish in a black liquid, dried trout impaled on sticks, sea slugs in soy, a paste made of pounded roots, and green cakes made of the slimy river confervae, pressed and dried, all ill-favored and unsavory viands. This afternoon a man without clothes was treading flour paste on a mat, a traveller in a blue silk robe was lying on the floor smoking, and 5 women in loose attire, with elaborate chignons and blackened teeth, were squatting round the fire. At the house-mistress's request, I wrote a eulogistic description of the view from her house, and read it in English, Ito translating it, to the very great satisfaction of the assemblage. Then I was asked to write on 4 fans. The woman has never heard of England. It is not a name to conjure with in these wilds. Neither has she heard of America. She knows of Russia as a great power, and of course of China, but there her knowledge ends, though she has been at Tokyo and Kyoto. July 1st. I was just falling asleep last night, in spite of mosquitoes and fleas, when I was roused by much talking and loud outcries of poultry, and Ito, carrying a screaming refractory hen, and a man and woman whom he had with difficulty bribed to part with it, appeared by my bed. I feebly said I would have it boiled for breakfast, but when Ito called me this morning, he told me with a most rueful face that just as he was going to kill it, it had escaped to the woods. In order to understand my feelings, you must have experienced what it is not to have tasted fish, flesh, or fowl for 10 days. The alternative was eggs and some of the paste which the man was treating yesterday on the mat, cut into strips and boiled. It was coarse flour and buckwheat. So, you see, I have learned not to be particular. ILB. End of section 17. Of Unbeaten Tracks in Japan by Isabella L. Bird. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Availle in April 2012. Letter 14. Tsugava, July 2nd. Yesterday's journey was one of the most severe I have yet had, for in 10 hours of hard travelling I only accomplished 15 miles. The road from Kurumatoge westwards is so infamous that the stages are sometimes little more than a mile. Yet it is by it, so far at least as the Tsugava River, that the produce and manufactures of the rich plain of Aizu, with its numerous towns, and of a very large interior district, must find an outlet at Niigata. In defiance of all modern ideas, it goes straight up and straight downhill, at a gradient that I should be afraid to hazard a guess at, and at present it is a perfect quagmire, into which great stones have been thrown, some of which have subsided edgewise, and others have disappeared altogether. It is the very worst road I ever rode over, and that is saying a good deal. Kurumatoge was the last of 17 mountain passes, over 2,000 feet high, which I have crossed since leaving Niko. Between it and Tsugava the scenery, though on a smaller scale, is of much the same character as hitherto: hills wooded to their tops, cleft by ravines which open out occasionally to divulge more distant ranges, all smothered in greenery, which, when I am ill-pleased, I am inclined to call rank vegetation. Oh, that an abrupt score, or a strip of flaming desert, or something salient and brilliant would break in, however discordantly, upon this monotony of green! The villages of that district must, I think, have reached the lowest abyss of filthiness in Hozawa and Sakayama. Fowls, dogs, horses, and people herded together in sheds black with wood smoke, and manure heaps drained into the wells. No young boy wore any clothing. Few of the men wore anything but the maro. The women were unclothed to their waists, and such clothing as they had was very dirty and held together by mere force of habit. The adults were covered with inflamed bites of insects, and the children with skin disease. Their houses were dirty, and as they squatted on their heels or lay face downwards, they looked little better than savages. Their appearance and the want of delicacy of their habits are simply abominable, and in the latter respect they contrast to great disadvantage with several savage peoples that I have been among. If I had kept to Niko, Hakone, Miyanoshita, and similar places visited by foreigners with less time, I should have formed a very different impression. Is their spiritual condition, I often wonder, much higher than their physical one? They are courteous, kindly, industrious, and free from gross crimes, but from the conversations that I have had with Japanese, and from much that I see, I judge that their standard of foundational morality is very low, and that life is neither truthful nor pure. I put up here at a crowded yadoya, where they have given me 2 cheerful rooms in the garden, away from the crowd. Ito's great desire on arriving at any place is to shut me up in my room and keep me a close prisoner till the start the next morning, but here I emancipated myself, and enjoyed myself very much sitting in the daidokoro. The housemaster is of the samurai, or 2-sworded class, now, as such, extinct. His face is longer, his lips thinner, and his nose straighter and more prominent than those of the lower class, and there is a difference in his manner and bearing. I have had a great deal of interesting conversation with him. In the same open space his clerk was writing at a lacquer desk of the stereotyped form, a low bench with the ends rolled over. A woman was tailoring, coolies were washing their feet on the itama, and several more were squatting round the irori smoking and drinking tea. A coolie servant washed some rice for my dinner, but before doing so took off his clothes, and the woman who cooked it let her kimono fall to her waist before she began the work, as is customary among respectable women. The housemaster's wife and Ito talked about me unguardedly. I asked what they were saying. "She says," said he, "that you are very polite for a foreigner," he added. I asked what she meant, and found that it was because I took off my boots before I stepped on the matting, and bowed when they handed me the tabako bon. We walked through the town to find something eatable for tomorrow's river journey, but only succeeded in getting wafers made of white of egg and sugar, balls made of sugar and barley flour, and beans coated with sugar. Thatch, which is picturesqueness, has disappeared, and the Tsugava roofs are of strips of bark weighted with large stones, but as the houses turn their gable ends to the street, and there is a promenade the whole way under the eaves, and the street turns twice at right angles and terminates in temple grounds on a bank above the river, it is less monotonous than most Japanese towns. It is a place of 3,000 people, and a good deal of produce is shipped from hence to Niigata by the river. Today it is thronged with pack horses. I was much mobbed, and one child formed a solitary exception on the general rule of politeness by calling me a name equivalent to the Chinese "fang kuai" (foreign), but he was severely chidden, and a policeman has just called with an apology. A slice of fresh salmon has been produced, and I think I never tasted anything so delicious. I have finished the first part of my land journey, and leave for Niigata by boat tomorrow morning. ILB. End of section 18. Section 19 of Unbeaten Tracks in Japan by Isabella L. Bird. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Availle in April 2012. Letter 15. Niigata, July 4th. The boat for Niigata was to leave at 8, But at 5 Ito roused me by saying they were going at once as it was full, and we left in haste, the housemaster running to the river with one of my large baskets on his back to "speed the parting guest." 2 rivers unite to form a stream over whose beauty I would gladly have lingered, and the morning, singularly rich and tender in its colouring, ripened into a glorious day of light without glare and heat without oppressiveness. The packet was a stoutly built boat, 45 feet long by 6 broad, propelled by one man sculling at the stern, and another pulling a short broad-bladed oar, which worked in a wisteria loop at the bow. It had a croquet mallet handle about 18 inches long, to which the man gave a wriggling turn at each stroke. Both rower and sculler stood the whole time, clad in umbrella hats. The forepart and centre carried bags of rice and crates of pottery, and the hinder part had a thatched roof which, when we started, sheltered 25 Japanese, but we dropped them at hamlets on the river, and reached Niigata with only 3. I had my chair on the top of the cargo, and found the voyage a delightful change from the fatiguing crawl through quagmires at the rate of from 15 to 18 miles a day. This trip is called "running the rapids of the Tsugava," because for about 12 miles the river, hemmed in by lofty cliffs, studded with visible and sunken rocks, making several abrupt turns and shallowing in many places, hurries a boat swiftly downwards, and it is said that it requires long practice, skill, and coolness on the part of the boatmen to prevent grave and frequent accidents. But if they are rapids, they are on a small scale, and look anything but formidable. With the river at its present height, the boats run down 45 miles in 8 hours, charging only 30 sen, or 1s. 3d, but it takes from 5 to 7 days to get up, and much hard work in poling and towing. The boat had a thoroughly native look, with its bronzed crew, thatched roof, and the umbrella hats of all its passengers hanging on the mast. I enjoyed every hour of the day. It was luxury to drop quietly down the stream, the air was delicious, and, having heard nothing of it, the beauty of the Tsugava came upon me as a pleasant surprise, besides that every mile brought me nearer the hoped-for home letters. Almost as soon as we left Tsugava the downward passage was apparently barred by fantastic mountains, which just opened their rocky gates wide enough to let us through, and then closed again. Pinnacles and needles of bare flushed rock rose out of luxuriant vegetation, Quireng without its bareness, the Rhine without its ruins, and more beautiful than both. There were mountains connected by ridges no broader than a horse's back, others with great grey buttresses, deep chasms cleft by streams, temples with pagoda roofs on heights, sunny villages with deep thatched roofs hidden away among blossoming trees, and through rifts in the nearer ranges, glimpses of snowy mountains. After a rapid turn of 12 miles through this enchanting scenery, the remaining course of the Tsugava is that of a broad, full stream winding marvellously through a wooded and tolerably level country, partially surrounded by snowy mountains. The river life was very pretty. Canoes abounded, some loaded with vegetables, some with wheat, others with boys and girls returning from school. Sampans, with their white puckered sails in flotillas of a dozen at a time, crawled up the deep water, or were towed through the shallows by crews frolicking and shouting. Then the scene changed to a broad and deep river, with a peculiar alluvial smell from the quantity of vegetable matter held in suspension, flowing calmly between densely wooded, bamboo-fringed banks, just high enough to conceal the surrounding country. No houses, or nearly none, are to be seen, but signs of a continuity of population abound. Every 100 yards almost there is a narrow path to the river through the jungle, with a canoe moored at its foot. Erections like gallows, with a swinging bamboo, with a bucket at one end and a stone at the other, occurring continually, show the vicinity of households dependent upon the river for their water supply. Wherever the banks admitted of it, horses were being washed by having water poured over their backs with a dipper. Naked children were rolling in the mud, and cackling of poultry, human voices, and sounds of industry were ever floating towards us from the dense greenery of the shores, making one feel, without seeing, that the margin was very populous. Except the boatman and myself, no one was awake during the hot, silent afternoon. It was dreamy and delicious. Occasionally, as we floated down, vineyards were visible with the vines trained on horizontal trellises, or bamboo rails, often 40 feet long, nailed horizontally on cryptomeria to a height of 20 feet, on which small sheaves of barley were placed astride, to dry till the frame was full. More forest, more dreams, then the forest and the abundant vegetation altogether disappeared, the river opened out among low lands and banks of shingle and sand, and by 3 we were on the outskirts of Niigata, whose low houses, with rows of stones upon their roofs, spread over a stretch of sand, beyond which is a sandy roll with some clumps of firs. Tea-houses with many balconies studded the riverside, and pleasure parties were enjoying themselves with geishas and sake. But, on the whole, the waterside streets are shabby and tumble down, and the landward side of the great city of Western Japan is certainly disappointing, and it was difficult to believe it a treaty port, for the sea was not in sight, and there were no consular flags flying. We poled along one of the numerous canals, which are the carriage-ways for produce and goods, among hundreds of loaded boats, landed in the heart of the city, and, as the result of repeated inquiries, eventually reached the Church Mission House, an unshaded wooden building without verandas, close to the government buildings, where I was most kindly welcomed by Mr. and Mrs. Fyson. The house is plain, simple, and inconveniently small, but doors and walls are great luxuries, and you cannot imagine how pleasing the ways of a refined European household are after the internal babblement and indecorum of the Japanese. Itinerary of route from Niko to Niigata. Kinugava route. From Tokyo to Niko, 36 ri. Kohyaku, 6 houses, 2 ri 18 cho. Kizagoe, 19 houses, 1 ri 18 cho. Fujihara, 46 houses, 2 ri 19 cho. Takahara, 15 houses, 2 ri 10 cho. Ikari, 25 houses, 2 ri. Nakamiyo, 10 houses, 1 ri 24 cho. Yokokawa, 20 houses, 2 ri 21 cho. Itosawa, 38 houses, 2 ri 34 cho. Kayashima, 57 houses, 1 ri 4 cho. Tajima, 250 houses, 1 ri 21 cho. Toyonari, 120 houses, 2 ri 12 cho. Atomi, 34 houses, 1 ri. Ochi, 27 houses, 2 ri 12 cho. Ichikawa, 7 houses, 2 ri 22 cho. Takata, 420 houses, 2 ri 11 cho. Bangé, 910 houses, 3 ri 4 cho. Katakado, 50 houses, 1 ri 20 cho. Nozawa, 306 houses, 3 ri 24 cho. Nojiri, 110 houses, 1 ri 27 cho. Kurumatoge, 3 houses, 9 cho. Hozawa, 20 houses, 1 ri 14 cho. Torige, 21 houses, 1 ri. Sakayama, 28 houses, 24 cho. Tsugava, 615 houses, 2 ri 18 cho. Niigata, 50,000 souls, 18 ri. Total 101 ri 6 cho, about 247 miles. ILB. End of section 19. Of Unbeaten Tracks in Japan by Isabella L. Bird. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Availle in April 2012. Letter 16. Niigata, July 9. I have spent over a week in Niigata and leave it regretfully tomorrow, rather for the sake of the friends I have made than for its own interests. I never experienced a week of more abominable weather. The sun has yet been seen just once, the mountains, which are 30 miles off, not at all. The clouds are a brownish grey, the air moist and motionless, and the mercury has varied from 82 degrees in the day to 80 degrees at night. The household is afflicted with lassitude and loss of appetite. Evening does not bring coolness, but myriads of flying, creeping, jumping, running creatures, all with power to hurt, which replace the day mosquitoes, villains with spotted legs which bite and poison one without the warning hum. The night mosquitoes are legion. There are no walks except in the streets and the public gardens, for Niigata is built on a sandspit, hot and bare. Neither can you get a view of it without climbing to the top of a wooden lookout. Niigata is a treaty port without foreign trade and almost without foreign residents. Not a foreign ship visited the port either last year or this. There are only 2 foreign firms, and these are German, and only 18 foreigners, of which number, except the missionaries, nearly all are in government employment. Its river, the Shinano, is the largest in Japan, and it and its affluents bring down a prodigious volume of water. But Japanese rivers are much choked with sand and shingle washed down from the mountains. In all that I have seen, except those which are physically limited by walls of hard rock, a river bed is a waste of sand, boulders, and shingle, through the middle of which, among sandbanks and shallows, the river proper takes its devious course. In the freshets, which occur to a greater or less extent every year, enormous volumes of water pour over these wastes, carrying sand and detritus down to the mouths, which are all obstructed by bars. Of these rivers, the Shinano, being the biggest, is the most refractory, and has piled up a bar at its entrance, through which there is only a passage 7 feet deep, which is perpetually shallowing. The minds of engineers are much exercised upon the Shinano, and the government is most anxious to deepen the channel and give Western Japan what it has not, a harbour, but the expense of the necessary operation is enormous, and in the meantime a limited ocean traffic is carried on by junks and by a few Japanese steamers which call outside. There is a British vice-consulate, but except as a step, few would accept such a dreary post or outpost. But Niigata is a handsome, prosperous city of 50,000 inhabitants, the capital of the wealthy province of Echigo, with a population of 1.5 millions, and is the seat of the Kenrei, or provincial governor, of the chief law courts, of fine schools, a hospital, and barracks. It is curious to find in such an excluded town a school deserving the designation of a college, as it includes intermediate, primary, and normal schools, an English school with 150 pupils, organized by English and American teachers, an engineering school, a geological museum, splendidly equipped laboratories, and the newest and most approved scientific and educational apparatus. The government buildings, which are grouped near Mr. Fison's, are of painted white wood and are imposing from their size and their innumerable glass windows. There is a large hospital arranged by a European doctor, with a medical school attached, and it, the kencho, the saibancho or courthouse, the schools, the barracks, and a large bank, which is rivaling them all, have a go-ahead Europeanized look, bold, staring, and tasteless. There are large public gardens, very well laid out, and with finely gravelled walks. There are 300 street lamps, which burn the mineral oil of the district. Yet, because the riotous Shinano persistently bars it out from the sea, its natural highway, the capital of one of the richest provinces of Japan, is left out in the cold, and the province itself, which yields not only rice, silk, tea, hemp, ninjin, and indigo in large quantities, but gold, copper, coal, and petroleum, has to send most of its produce to Yedo across ranges of mountains on the backs of pack horses, by roads scarcely less infamous than the one by which I came. The Niigata of the government, with its signs of progress in a western direction, is quite unattractive looking as compared with the genuine Japanese Niigata, which is the neatest, cleanest, and most comfortable looking town I have yet seen, and altogether free from the jostlement of a foreign settlement. It is renowned for the beautiful tea houses which attract visitors from distant places, and for the excellence of the theatres, and is the centre of the recreation and pleasure of a large district. It is so beautifully clean that, as at Niko, I should feel reluctant to walk upon its well-swept streets in muddy boots. It would afford a good lesson to the Edinburgh authorities, for every vagrant bit of straw, stick, or paper is at once pounced upon and removed, and no rubbish may stand for an instant in its streets, except in a covered box or bucket. It is correctly laid out in square divisions, formed by 5 streets over a mile long, crossed by very numerous short ones, and is intersected by canals, which are its real roadways. I have not seen a pack horse in the streets. Everything comes in by boat, and there are few houses in the city which cannot have their goods delivered by canal very near to their doors. These waterways are busy all day, but in the early morning, when the boats come in loaded with the vegetables, without which the people could not exist for a day, the bustle is indescribable. The cucumber boats just now are the great sight. The canals are usually in the middle of the streets, and have fairly broad roadways on both sides. They are much below the street level, and their nearly perpendicular banks are neatly faced with wood, broken at intervals by flights of stairs. They are bordered by trees, among which are many weeping willows, and, as the river water runs through them, keeping them quite sweet, and they are crossed at short intervals by light bridges, they form a very attractive feature of Niigata. The houses have very steep roofs of shingle, weighted with stones, and, as they are of very irregular heights, and all turn the steep gables of the upper stories streetwards, the town has a picturesqueness very unusual in Japan. The deep verandas are connected all along the streets, so as to form a sheltered promenade when the snow lies deep in winter. With its canals, with their avenues of trees, its fine public gardens, and clean picturesque streets, it is a really attractive town, but its improvements are recent, and were only lately completed by Mr. Masakata Kuzumoto, now governor of Tokyo. There is no appearance of poverty in any part of the town, but if there be wealth, it is carefully concealed. One marked feature of the city is the number of streets of dwelling houses, with projecting windows of wooden slats, through which the people can see without being seen, though at night, when the andons are lit, we saw, as we walked from Dr. Palm's, that in most cases families were sitting round the hibachi in a deshabille of the scantiest kind. The fronts are very narrow, and the houses extend backwards to an amazing length, with gardens in which flowers, shrubs, and mosquitoes are grown, and bridges are several times repeated so as to give the effect of fairyland as you look through from the street. The principal apartments in all Japanese houses are at the back, looking out on these miniature landscapes, for a landscape is skilfully dwarfed into a space often not more than 30 feet square. A lake, a rockwork, a bridge, a stone lantern, and a deformed pine are indispensable, but whenever circumstances and means admit of it, quaintnesses of all kinds are introduced. Small pavilions, retreats for tea-making, reading, sleeping in quiet and coolness, fishing under cover, and drinking sake. Bronze pagodas, cascades falling from the mouths of bronze dragons, rock caves with gold and silver fish darting in and out, lakes with rocky islands, streams crossed by green bridges, just high enough to allow a rat or frog to pass under, lawns and slabs of stone for crossing them in wet weather, grottos, hills, valleys, groves of miniature palms, cycas, and bamboo, and dwarfed trees of many kinds, of purplish and dull green hues, are cut into startling likenesses of beasts and creeping things, or stretch distorted arms over tiny lakes. I have walked about a great deal in Niigata, and when with Mrs. Fyson, who is the only European lady here at present, and her little Ruth, a pretty Saxon child of 3 years old, we have been followed by an immense crowd, as the sight of this fair creature with golden curls falling over her shoulders is most fascinating. Both men and women have gentle, winning ways with infants, and Ruth, instead of being afraid of the crowds, smiles upon them, bows in Japanese fashion, speaks to them in Japanese, and seems a little disposed to leave her own people altogether. It is most difficult to make her keep up with us, and 2 or 3 times, on missing her and looking back, we have seen her seated, native fashion, in a ring in a crowd of several hundred people, receiving an homage and admiration from which she was most unwillingly torn. The Japanese have a perfect passion for children, but it is not good for European children to be much with them, as they corrupt their morals and teach them to tell lies. The climate of Niigata and most of this great province contrasts unpleasantly with the region on the other side of the mountains, warmed by the Gulf Stream of the North Pacific, in which the autumn and winter, with their still atmosphere, bracing temperature, and blue and sunny skies, are the most delightful seasons of the year. 32 days of snowfall occur on an average. The canals and rivers freeze, and even the rapid Shinano sometimes bears a horse. In January and February the snow lies 3 or 4 feet deep, a veil of clouds obscures the sky, people inhabit their upper rooms to get any daylight, pack-horse traffic is suspended, pedestrians go about with difficulty in rough snowshoes, and for nearly 6 months the coast is unsuitable for navigation, owing to the prevalence of strong, cold, northwest winds. In this city, people in wadded clothes, with only their eyes exposed, creep about under the verandas. The population huddles round hibachis, and shivers, for the mercury, which rises to 90 degrees in summer, falls to 15 degrees in winter. And all this in latitude 37 degrees 55 minutes, 3 degrees south of Naples. ILB. End of section 20.